everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about room acoustics. So I want to go through my room, talk to you a little bit about what I've done in here, and then I've got quite extensive notes here. So we'll roll through some of the things I've written down that I think may be useful to you and might help you to get somewhere close to that neutral response in your room that I'm lucky enough to have in here, which makes, I think, a lot of the difference. The videos that I'm recording are, I'm hearing from a lot of people, sound fantastic. I think that is it isn't a coincidence that having a well-managed room makes a really big difference to what I'm recording. And obviously having a wonderful system, which I'm lucky enough to have, also really is paramount to the first part of it. But then that system is in this room, and the room is so important. And I guess let's start from the beginning, and I might have to put my glasses on for these ones. So getting your room right really is critical. I see so many audiophiles out there going round and round in circles, buying more equipment and not really getting any benefit from it. Most of this is due to the fact that they haven't spent any time or the insignificant amount of money that it actually costs to spend on getting some room acoustic treatment done to get your room sounding right. One of the first things I walk into a room, and one of the first things I do when I walk into a room is I clap. First thing I do, I get in the room and I clap. Now, if I'm hearing anything coming back at me, then that's slap echo. And slap echo is a really bad thing in relation to smearing the soundstage articulation in the room. And that's the very first thing I do when I walk in a room. And more often than not, that's what I hear. I hear this stuff coming back at me. And that's the first thing you've got to get rid of. And that comes down to absorption. You've got to have sound absorption in your room to cope with that. So anyway, I've probably digressed off my notes here a little bit. But anyway, let's get back to it. But that's one of the first things that I noticed. Further to that, the room is the body of the instrument to which you listen to your sound system in. So why does a Stradivarius violin sound so good? Because the maker spent the time and understood that the body of that violin was what made the sound so sweet, so engaging, so Stradivarius-like. So the same thing applies in your room. It's the body of the instrument to which you listen to your sound system in. So getting that right is so critical. I guarantee you, if you spend a fraction of the money you spend on your equipment getting your room right first, that bit of advice there will save you thousands and thousands of dollars more often than not, because you won't have to, you'll be happy with your system. Now, I know we all want to keep going up the ladder, and I get that 100%. I'm the same. But you will find so much more satisfaction in your system when you spend what is about 10% of what you spend on your system on room management. It's so important. So let's get that one said and out of the way. So sound engineers and acousticians, right? They will take a lot of care in a recording studio to get a flat response in that room. They'll do that for the tracking room. They do it in the mixing room. They make sure, as I know, that you get a flat response in that room so that you can hear what's being recorded. So why not do the same thing in your room when you play it back? It's just as important to get that sorted out in the place where that music is coming back to your ears. So that's a really important point. Something that, I'm just trying to paint the picture of what we do as sound engineers to get things right. So that must it's just silly that you wouldn't think that that would translate into what you're doing in your house when you're playing your system back. And so many people just don't think about the system. They just keep on the merry-go-round of buying more equipment and trying to improve things. And often than not, you don't improve anything. It just sounds the same, maybe a bit more volume, maybe a little bit more something that you didn't get and that's just a different flavor in a different component. But if you do room acoustics and get that right up front, then you can really hear what your equipment's doing. It's so important. So yeah, so all rooms are going to be different. To just these are general guidelines. Then I can't, because I don't know your room, I can't give you specific things to do to improve your room. I may work on doing some sort of consultancy thing a bit later on down the track. I'm not even thinking about it at the moment, but I have got a lot to offer when it comes to getting a room sounding right. And so there may be an opportunity down the track for me to offer a consultancy to my subscribers and help you, to do that. But at this stage, all I wanted to do was help you all out in a general sense, give you some really good tips and things to think about and things you might like to consider to get you started. And I guarantee you will hear a difference if you've not spent any time getting your room right. So anyway, that might be something we can look at down the track. So all rooms are going to be different. We know that. We've spoken about that. In my room, I use a combination of absorption, diffusion, and diaphragmatic bass traps, and decoupling of my speakers. So a couple of people asked me what I've got underneath my Alexias, and I'm using Acoustics Gaia Titan Theos, which is the first of the Titan series for the weight of 116 kilos. The Alexias weigh, so they're heavy. So that's the correct Acoustics footer for that speaker, and it's a bit of a big thank you to Mark. He knows who he is. He was instrumental in me tracking down a set of those. So thanks, Mark. Well done. So anyway, back to the decoupling is super important. So I live in a house that's probably, I think it's about 80 years old. It has timber floors. It's a nice solid old house. It's got timber floors, suspended timber floors, and really, really good acoustic underlay and carpet that I've got down first. Now, when I had my speakers on spikes, at certain volumes and at certain frequencies, I would excite the floor in this room. And all of a sudden there would be, and you probably all heard this, there was like a bloom of my bad frequency in this room is 80 hertz. So I have an 80 hertz room mode. So if you double that frequency, generally speaking, so at 160 hertz, I have a suck out in the room. So it's about trying to pull that suck out up as close as we can to get to flat and pull as much of that peak out. By virtue of putting those Acoustics footers underneath those speakers, I was able to take about 2/3 of that 80 hertz bump out, which of course translates to picking up the suck out. Because if we're not exciting the room, we're then not going to pull that opposing frequency out of the room to the point where it starts sounding unnatural. So that was really, really super important. It was the last thing I did, but when they were on spikes, I knew exactly when the floor was being excited, and I could hear immediately. There was an 80 hertz bloom in the room, which of course disturbs everything. It disturbs everything you're hearing in the soundstage. It smears all those spatial cues in the soundstage, especially with lower frequency stuff. Bass below that frequency is omnidirectional anyway, so you just don't know where it's coming from. It just engulfs the room. And then, of course, you get that 160 hertz suck out, which makes things sound, the mid bass, the beginning of that mid bass, to sound really thin, and you just get, it literally is like a bouncing wave. And that's one of the bigger problems I had in here. So whilst I'm not completely flat in this room, I'm really, really close. I'm just up or down, 1 dB at the worst particular points in it. So it's now extremely good, and everything changed when I put those footers under those speakers. It was something, once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. So they were instrumental to helping me with the speakers, which was really the last frontier for my system in getting the right decoupling underneath the speakers. I'm a big believer in decoupling as opposed to coupling a speaker to the ground, because at the end of the day, all you're doing is changing that tuning frequency in the speaker. It's still going to excite the thing that it's sitting on. If you can decouple the speaker from what it's sitting on, then there's just no way that any major frequency can transduce itself through that footer and into the floor where the problem starts happening. So that's my belief as far as decoupling speakers go. I really believe in it. I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. And I'll have a bit more to say about that. As I said, all of my equipment is decoupled on my rack, and very shortly I'm going to put the stack audio. Now, I apologize for yesterday, I think I said stacks audio, I'm thinking about headphones, but stack audio footers, decouplers underneath my Kuzma turntable, and we'll do some before and afters on that. So that's coming. So that if you're interested in that one, for all you analog guys, we're going to give that a run pretty soon. And then what I may be doing is I might reach out to Stax Audio and see if they can provide me with some footers, and we might do a runoff between the ISO Acoustics and the Stack Audio footers for the Wilsons, and we'll have a listen to the differences, and I can talk to you about what I'm hearing. That could be an interesting thing that could come down the track too. So I might reach out to Josh in the UK and see if we can do something there. But anyway, I digress. So one of the first things you should be doing in your room is setting yourself up with an equilateral triangle between your speakers and your seated position. So there's a rule here as well. A basic rule here is, for the distance that your speakers are apart from you, should be the distance you are away from them in the center. Now there's a 25% rule there. You can be another 25% further away than the speaker position, the distance between the speaker position. You can be an extra 25% away in around about that area. That's really the sweet spot. If you get too much further out than that, then you're going to have to start changing the toe in of your speakers to get soundstage articulation correct. So just work on trying to keep that distance, that triangle, if you like, that equilateral triangle, in the middle. Keep you in the middle of those speakers and the same distances between each speaker. That's a really good way to start. Now look, I get and I understand all these rooms are going to be different sizes, different shapes. These are just general guidelines. If you can achieve these things, you will go a long way to getting soundstage articulation, height, depth, width, everything really working much more evenly and more predictably if you do that. Now there are obviously other speakers around too that make that don't require the sort of toe in that that I certainly require with the Wilsons. But remember this as well, a little difference with toe in and rake and things like that can make a very big difference. I can change something on my speakers that I can move them 10 mil, 15 mil, and I can hear a difference. Suddenly the imaging, when I was doing all the setting up, suddenly I spent 2 weeks voicing these speakers in this room before I was happy where they were. Now I'm a bit of a head case and I'm a real, OCD kind of person when it comes to getting that right. So I kept moving them around until I was 100% happy with them. And to do that, sometimes you've got to move them out so you can hear you've affected them, to move them back in. It's all about finding that spot. Now, I'm a big believer in the late David Wilson's finding that position of neutrality in a room. I don't care what speaker it is. I really believe all speakers will benefit from watching that video. So you can get online and see the late David Wilson, God rest him, talking about his method for that position of neutrality in the room. One of my specialties is setting Wilson speakers up for people, and I've done quite a bit of it over the time. But generally, setting speakers up for people is one of those things that I obsess over to get right. So finding that system, I won't go into the how you do that. Have a look at the video on the Wilson website On there, you'll see David's goes through talking about all of that, and it really is absolutely worthwhile. If you own a set of Wilsons, it's absolutely mandatory that you do it. But I honestly believe I've used that same method for many speakers, for different people that have had them, and that it seems to work. It seems to work in my experience for just about everything I've tried it with. So again, general guideline, have a look at the video and then have a bit of a play around and see if you get some improvements. Now at the end of this, I really want to get some feedback from you guys. I want to see if you try some of this stuff I'm suggesting and you get a benefit, or it goes the other way. Please let me know. I'd be really interested to hear from you and see what you think about these guidelines. So that's another one worth considering. The next thing that you need to think about is first reflection points. So a great way to set first reflection points or determine where they are in your room is you need an extra person to do this. And what you do is you sit in your seated position. Now this has been said on various other videos. I'm a subscriber of it. I think it's how you start working out where you need to put that first point of either absorption or diffusion in your room. Mostly, I would use absorption at that first point of reflection, because what you want to do is slow down that reflection as much as you possibly can before it gets to your ears. Now, it's going to get to your ears, there's no doubt about that. But if we leave that after longer than 0.6 of a second, then our brain throws that out and says, that's a reflection, it's not part of what I'm listening to, and it does. And us human beings, we don't focus on that as being a smearing of the soundstage. So all we've got to do is slow it down enough for our brains to go, no, throwing that away, discarding that, don't need it. So the best way to do this is to get that your friend, your wife, whoever it might be, get a mirror. Put the mirror against the wall directly beside your speaker, and then move that mirror further back toward where you are seated against the wall until you can see the tweeter or the mid-range. So you want that mirror to be in line with the tweeter and mid-range roughly of your speaker. When you can see that reflection of that tweeter and mid-range in the mirror, put a piece of masking tape or something on the wall right at that point. That is your first point of reflection. That is a place that you either need to diffuse the sound at or absorb the sound at. They're the two critical things to do at that point. Then the tuning of the room around that depends on how lively the room is, how many hard surfaces are in the room, whether you're sitting near a window, a glass window, whether you've got a big television in your room, as most of us do. Most of the rooms that we listen to stereo systems in are multi-function rooms. They're rooms that, they're living rooms, they're family rooms, they're if you're lucky enough to have a dedicated listening room, well then you can go a lot further to getting things 100% right in the room. But the rest of it is going to be compromised. So that's cool, but being able to get that first point of reflection and put something there that can either absorb or diffuse that sound will go a long way to tidying up that articulation in the sound stage, getting you to be able to really easily focus on where everything is in the sound stage. When you sit there in your listening position and you close your eyes and you listen, if you've got that first point of reflection sorted out, you will hear definite spatial cues where the engineer places the musicians in the sound stage. So that's the sort of thing you're going to be listening for when you get that, when you find that point of first reflection and you deal with it. Okay, so that's that one. Let's go back to the iPad here. Okay, speaker positioning is really super important. As we've touched on before about getting those speakers in the right position. Now, in smaller rooms, and if you've got really difficult room modes, a little tip that I find is moving your system or that equilateral triangle into more of a near field position. So bring the speakers into you a bit closer, bring your seated position up a little bit, do the correct adjustments, because these adjustments for toe in happen no matter what size the equilateral triangle is. You will hear when you lock that imaging in. Find a track where there's a vocal. You know that vocal comes directly out of the center of the soundstage, and play that piece of music until that vocal, when you close your eyes, sounds really focused and locked in. When that happens, you're at that, you've got the toe in of your speakers working in such a way that you're getting that soundstage articulation. Now in rooms where there are lots of room modes, by making that equilateral triangle smaller, you take the room, more of the room out of the equation. If you use all of the room, and there's a lot of room modes in that room, a lot of bad frequency blooming and smearing and what have you, then you're inviting trouble, as it were. If you bring that position in, now there's a point where speakers and the size of your speakers and how far away from them you need to be is a thing, right? That you need to be considering as well. But this is, again, general advice, that if you bring that equilateral triangle in a bit closer, you may find that you take some of the room interaction out of what you're listening to, and you hear more of just what's coming from the speakers without any room interference. So that's another important point to consider if you're still having problems. As I said, small adjustments make a massive difference in relation to speaker toe in and position in and out. So keep that in mind, and don't make any massive big movements when you're trying to set your room and your system up. Just find that the best thing that David Wilson says is, when you find that position of neutrality in your room, you tape that up so that you know where it is, and then you make micro adjustments around that position, because you're generally in the right spot. All you've got to do is just lock it in. So that's where finding that spot first for the two positions you want to put your speakers in is really important, because it saves the second guessing and should I be a foot further this way or a foot further back that way? If you're making 12-inch or foot long, 30-centimeter adjustments, you're going to get yourself dizzy. You're just not going to be able to make the sort of fine-tuning adjustments when you find that position of neutrality that you need to find to be able to really lock things in and know where you are. Write some notes down too. It really does help. At that position, this happened. At this position, that happened. And then you know not to go back there. And just get a roll of masking tape and just mask a little corner as you look down the side of your speaker, so that and then make the adjustment, and then adjust the tape. It is fiddly work, but trust me, if you do these kinds of things, you'll get so much more out of your equipment. I guarantee you, it doesn't matter what your equipment is, you will get it sounding better if you do this. So that's so as I said to you, I'm a big believer in the late David Wilson's philosophy of finding that position of neutrality in the room, and it's a really important thing. Keep in mind the chair you're sitting in, for instance. So I have an Ames chair, and it has the backrest comes to just around my shoulders. I don't want any interaction with the back of my chair and my ears. Don't want that happening, because you'll get reflections, especially off leather, you'll get reflections off the back of that chair, which will disturb those spatial cues again. So if you can find a chair that has you sitting in your normal seated position, and the backrest of the chair isn't any higher up than your shoulders, is a great place to start. If you do that, you will find that you won't have any interaction with what's happening around your head and behind you, which is critical to spatial cues in the sound stage. So that's worth considering. Obviously, now this is another one. This is another really interesting point. This is a long video, but these are all pretty important points. Keep in mind this. It's a really important thing. Different room sizes play a bearing on where the SBL maximum is in your room. So for instance, people will go, they'll turn their system up, keep turning it up, and they'll go, yeah, they're into the track, and then all of a sudden it feels like it's getting a bit hard to listen to. And people immediately think the system's finding its limit. I suggest what's happening in an untreated room is you have found the SBL limit of that room that you're listening to your system in, more often than not. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes you are pushing an amplifier to a point where it starts to get to the point where it's clipping, and that we hear as harsh, a harsh sound when we're squaring off the sound wave and we're clipping it. So the thing that you need to consider there is that you may have found the maximum. For instance, turn it back down a little bit again and then sit back and listen. And if all of a sudden that system sounds, you're hearing everything in a much more laid back, relaxed fashion, and you're into the music. Now, I know some of us want to turn it up a bit louder, but that can be detrimental, because if we've got to a point where the room we're listening in has got, and all rooms have a maximum SBL limit before they start to interact with what you're listening to. And that's when all kinds of smearing and room modes and exciting room modes starts to happen. And we perceive that as being distortion or clipping, or the system's at its limit, when in actual fact, often than not, it's got nothing to do with the system and everything to do with the maximum SBL limit you can get out of your room. So those things are really important to consider. Sometimes if we're not in the right sort of room and we haven't treated it properly or enough, we get to a limit. Now, I'm not in a very big room, but I can listen in here at 95, 98 dB. I don't stay in here for long and I don't listen for long at those levels, but it's my system. You just keep turning the volume up, and it gets more and more and more engaging in the room without ever feeling harsh at all. Some of that has got to do with the components I have, obviously, but a lot of it, a heck of a lot of it's got to do with the fact that this room is well treated. So I don't excite the room modes in here because I've got the correct amount of absorption, diffusion, and trapping of the lower frequencies to stop that smearing and that harshness that we hear, that we immediately attribute to the system, when in actual fact, a lot of the time it's got nothing to do with the system. So that's important. There's no doubt that there are always, there'll always be compromises in a room, and that is true. I mean, rooms, there will be compromises. That we all have compromises in our room. I think you can see from here, there is some masking tape against the fins of what behind that absorber is a fireplace, a gas fireplace. I have taped up those fins because at certain frequencies, those fins start singing. They start resonating in the room. So I taped all that up, and I don't use that heater for obviously heating the room, but I have to quieten it down. Things like windows, where windows slide shut. Sometimes at certain frequencies, you'll get that window will resonate against the frame. Get a bit of cardboard, something that your wife or your girlfriend won't scream at you for putting in there, and wedge a bit of cardboard in where you can just turn your system up to that point where you're hearing that, and then get your ear around and start listening for where these things are coming from. Wedge a bit of cardboard in there. You'll be amazed at what that will do to the noise floor in your room. And it makes the system sound more real. When you get great big transient sweeps in a track, for instance, I played a Fanfare for the Common Man just before and recorded it. It was a request by a good mate of mine, Paul. He wanted to hear it in my room, and so I indulged that, and I loved it because that has got huge strikes on a drum in there, and I was pushing to about 85 dB when I was listening to that. And when those drum hits happened in the room, I felt air movement in the room. It was percussive. It hit me in the chair. I didn't hear any of the room at all. And when those sorts of big transient hits happen, sometimes in a really well sorted out room, it's alarming. It scares you. But that's part of the life of the music that's coming out of your system that you're engaging with. But if you hear a vibration here or a rattle there, the first thing your brain starts to think about is, oh, the room's playing up, I'm hearing something. And then you're not focused on the music anymore. So trying to track down the little resonant things that you can quieten down in your room are really important. I did it there. I've also got some cardboard wedged in the windows behind my seated position that stopped those window frames vibrating and starting to just detract me from what I was doing listening to music. So that's important. So it's good to track those things down. If you've got hard floors in your room, I'm lucky I don't, but I do have timber floors, but they're carpeted in this room. Try putting a rug. Now, again, that's been said ad nauseum on, you know, everybody's talked about that, but it really works. Put a rug down in front of your speakers. That will help a lot of that bounce off reflection, which is smearing. It's the same as the stuff that comes off the walls, the roof, everywhere else. It's smearing, so it takes away from the articulation in the soundstage. So consider putting a mat down on the floor. Consider the soft furnishings in your room. Another really good example, and I've done it here too. I've got diaphragmatic bass traps in all four corners. So bass builds up in the corners of rooms where the roof and the walls meet. That's where you get a build-up of low frequency. So putting bass trapping in all four corners is really super important. Another thing that can help without going to the expense, and that was the most expensive thing I did, was put those bass traps in. They were about $3,500 to buy those, but made a massive difference in my room. Money well spent as far as I was concerned. But put chairs, soft furnishings, like preferably fabric type couches and things like that, or single chairs as I've got in the two corners of my room. They work as sort of quasi bass traps. They will absorb some of the frequencies in your room. Again, it's not going to do the sorts of things that properly designed bass trapping is going to do, but all of these little things, like consider where all the hard things are in your room and try and soften those areas a bit when you're listening to music critically. Put a doona over the top of the television. When I've got an acoustic pillowcase that when I'm really critically listening, I slide the black acoustic pillowcase over that 75-inch TV. And what it does is it just allows more articulation in the soundstage. I have special acoustic foam all over that wall behind the TV. That does two things. It absorbs frequencies and it diffuses frequencies as well. And when I put all that up, the difference there was, again, I mean, that was about $400 to buy that foam. And it made, it added about $5,000, $10,000 worth of soundstage focus to my room. Like the depth in my room was amazing once I put that up. So again, I was eliminating the back wall, or the front wall as we call it. I was eliminating that wall and allowing, when things were thrown back for spatial cues, the system was able to throw those sorts of cues further back in the room so that you could hear things. You could understand that's what was being engineered in the recording. So again, another really important thing to consider. I think that probably pretty much covers most of the things that I really wanted to talk about. Yeah, in the room, I've gone through a few things and jumped ahead of myself a bit. But consider all of those things. It's a really important thing to get the room right. It's super important, in fact. It's one of the last things we do as audiophiles, but it's one of the first things we should do before we start upgrading on that merry-go-round, because you will find you'll need to do that less, and you may even be happy where your system is once you've got the room right, and you will spend a fraction of the money you will spend on good, really high-end, good quality equipment on getting your room right, and it will make the biggest difference, more than you can imagine. So consider all those things. If you like what I'm doing here with the channel, please consider giving me a thumbs up, and if you like my philosophy around my process to high-end audio, I'd love to see you subscribe to the channel. Love having everybody on board. It's a real treat for me to do this and help the community of music lovers as best I can. So please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing the videos around to your friends. Now, another little quick thing I want to talk about is my wife's been very, very busy doing a little animation intro to the videos. I'm going to put it in, you will have seen it at the start of this video, and it'll run now on my longer videos. Let me know what you think of it. I'll be interested in your thoughts, whether you think it's the right length and you like the style of it. But that's going to be now put on the front of all of the major long videos when I talk about things like this. So please stay tuned. We'll talk soon. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.